Paul Bunyan was born in Maine. When he arrived, the baby was so big it took a dozen storks to deliver him. His ma and pa had to milk 20 cows just to fill his baby bottle, and if they didn't feed him fast enough, the rumbling of his tummy caused earthquakes. The only cradle big enough for him was a fishing boat, and when little Paul would rock in the bay, it sent tidal waves onto the shore. After a spell, Paul's folks thought it would be best to move somewhere where there was more room for their, little boy. So they packed up and headed west into the big woods. One winter, it was so cold that the snow turned blue. It was so cold that the very words people spoke froze and fell to the ground, shattering in silence. It was so cold that the thermometer put on a winter coat and refused to take it off so everyone could see the exact number of degrees below zero. It was so cold that when the old-timers popped out their false teeth, those chompers kept right on chattering. Paul went out for a little wander when the blue snow fell, marveling at how silent and still everything was. But just as he rounded a clump of spruce trees, he heard a mournful sound coming from a big blue snowdrift. Paul looked, and inside was a little baby ox, shivering and blue with the cold. Paul scooped up the poor little feller and took him home. He fed him warm soup and buckets of hot milk, and soon the ox was feeling well again. But he stayed blue for all his days. Paul named him Babe, and the two were best friends for life. Paul took good care of Babe, and the little ox calf grew quickly. One morning, Paul went out to the barn to check on his friend, and to his surprise, he found that both Babe and the barn were gone. Paul stomped around frantically, causing the ground to shake, until at last, on a grassy hilltop, he found Babe munching grass while wearing the barn wedged tight on his back. Little Babe had grown so much overnight that he filled up the entire barn and carried it away with him. This made Paul quite cheerful, as he could see that Babe would become the perfect partner for his work. After a little bit of training, Babe could help Paul haul 100 trees at once. Paul could hitch up Babe to a crookedy river, and the blue ox would pull it straight so that the logs could float down nice and easy. As Paul grew up, he learned to follow his father in the trade of a lumberjack. When at last Paul and Babe were ready, they headed just a bit further west to look for work. When they arrived in Minnesota, Paul could see that Babe would need drinking water, so he dug several enormous troughs, and today these are the Great Lakes. As Paul walked back and forth carrying away the extra dirt from digging, his enormous footsteps filled with water, making Minnesota the land of 1,000 lakes. At last the two of them set up camp by the Onion River, the biggest camp there ever was. You'd have to pack a week's worth of food to carry it with you if you needed to walk from one side to the other. And of course, to help him, Paul needed his crew. There was Johnny Inkslinger, the clerk who kept the books, and Big Ole, the smithy, who could make anything using just the steely look in his eye. There were 7 axemen. Each one was named Elmer and was 6 feet tall while he was sitting down. Brimstone Bill looked after Babe, and Sourdough Sam kept everybody fed. Big Ole made a griddle so enormous that you couldn't see across it when it was sizzling with heat. The chefs would strap sides of ham to their feet and skate around the griddle to grease it up, and they'd pour down the pancake batter using 5,000-gallon pails held up from the tops of the tallest trees in camp. Paul and his crew moved around, cutting timber wherever it was needed, and Paul left his mark on the land. One evening, Paul and Babe got to roughhousing. Babe would paw and kick, and Paul would stomp as the ox charged at him. They had such a tussle and kicked up so much land that the entire chain of the Rocky Mountains had been raised up before they were done. Another time, the crew got lost on their way to the Oregon Territory. They took a wrong turn at Tulsa and ended up in the Sonora Desert. Everyone was just dying of thirst, and soon even Paul couldn't hold up his axe. He let it drop, and as he walked, it dragged along, carving the Grand Canyon into the red soil. Paul and Babe lived a good long time together, but one day the blue ox died after eating too many pancakes. Paul wept an entire river of tears, so many that the Mississippi River is still flowing today. Babe was buried in the Dakota Territory, and the mound over him is now known as the Black Hills. Eventually, the lower 48 states got just a little too crowded and a little too civilized for Paul's taste, so he packed up and moved to Alaska. Folks don't see him too much these days, but they say you can still hear his laughter rolling over the great mountains like thunder, and at night, the gleam from his campfire reflects off his axe, shining in the skies as the northern lights.